This is Istanbul, the ancient city at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. We're here to speak to a Turkish company behind a plan to bring emergency power to South Africa using floating power stations. If the plan goes ahead, a small armada of ships will sail to 3 South African harbours, Saldanha, Kucha and Richards Bay, to generate electricity from gas turbines mounted on them. The company behind the plan, Car Powership, won their bid more than 2 years ago, but numerous obstacles have prevented implementation, even as load shedding went through the roof. There's been a court case with accusations of smoky backroom deals, and environmental approvals have been withheld after corners were cut. Car Powership's solution doesn't come cheap. It will, it's been estimated, cost South Africa over 200 billion rand over the contract period of 20 years. And why 20 years anyway, while this was supposed to be an emergency solution? Load shedding is costing the country billions too, and it's costing the ANC electoral support as next year's do-or-die elections approach, which may just be why government has started talking about a trimmed-down contract with Car Powership, one that'll be for 5 years only. Is this a good idea or just plain desperation? Let's get some answers. My guest tonight is Zeynep Harizi. She is the Chief Commercial Officer of Car Powership, and she's also the daughter of the Karadeniz family, which owns the company. Ms. Harizi, may I call you Zeynep?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the first time you've spoken to the South African media. Why have you decided to chat and speak out now?
Thank you very much, dear Annika. With your permission, I'll just give a little bit of a background of the company. As Car Powership, we're the owner and operator of the world's only floating power plant fleet, Powerships. Today, we have 6,000 megawatts in operation in 14 countries around the world, all the way from New Caledonia to Brazil, in every time zone, providing reliable and fast-track electricity in an economic manner. Today, South Africans are cold, wet, and miserable with load shedding. They can't even boil a kettle.
I know.
And let go of a cup of tea, but this is the millions of South African young generation who are not able to find jobs because their economy is crumbling under load shedding. And that is what we hope to stop. As Car Powership, we are ready to go to South Africa in less than 90 days, provide 1,200 megawatts, which will alleviate at least one level of load shedding.
You haven't spoken to the South African media before. Is this because you've been accused of not being transparent about the deal? Or is that onus not really on you, but perhaps on government side?
We are a technology company. We are not a media facing, we're not selling anything luxury. We never thought that we need to do marketing of our project, branding of it to the public. We sell electricity.
Crisis comes?
Exactly.
I mean, because you're taking a whole lot of journalists to Brazil to show them how well Car Powership's working there. We have paid for our trip here, but there's definitely a sense that you need to right the perceptions in South Africa about Car Powership.
That's exactly what we came to the realization of. We said, even if we are just a technology company, the public still wants to know. So we need to communicate our side of the story to the public and make sure that everybody knows any detail about the project. That's why before the interview, I also kindly asked you, Annika, ask me anything.
You did.
Anything, and I will answer as openly as I can.
Let me take you back. The South African Department of Minerals and Energy issued an emergency procurement plan for energy in 2020, and you won a fairly sizable share in 2021. Why are those ships, 8 ships, that are designated for 3 ports in South Africa still sitting here in Istanbul?
In the tender that was issued, we were the cheapest second, third, and fourth bidder. So there were in total 11 projects that were awarded, and we were awarded 3 of those 11 projects. And our projects were the second, third, and fourth cheapest amongst the 11. And out of the 11, the other 3 were able to reach financial close, and the 8 of them are still in progress. Today, we're waiting for permits and licenses from the FFE, ESCOM, IPP office, and TMPA. So everything is going in the right direction, but South Africa is quite a bureaucratic country. And we really appreciate this, the reason behind it, because there have been so many questions in the past about procurement processes in South Africa. So all authorities are making sure they're doing their jobs diligently and making sure they're dotting all the T's and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's and not leaving anything to mistake. So we get the full support of the South African government. It's just the process is quite bureaucratic.
Why was the deal made for 20 years when usually you go into countries, you're operating in 14 countries at the moment, you usually go in for, say, 5, at the most 10 years. 20 years is a very long time to pull up anchor and sail away.
I completely agree with you, and you're absolutely right. The tender process was technology agnostic, meaning you could bid with anything from solar, batteries, fusion, and the tender itself was out for 20 years. So everybody who submitted a bid was doing their calculations based on 20 years. But as Karpowership company, and I will tell this for the first time on your show today, we are ready to come for only 5 years as well.
That would make more sense because a 20-year contract could cost around 300 billion rand, which is a huge amount. How much would that cost for 5 years? Because you're very reliant on the price of gas, which is fluctuating wildly because of the war in Ukraine.
That's true. Almost 60 to 70% of our all-in electricity cost is comprised of the gas price. So the power ships themselves is only 30-40% of the electricity price. The gas makes up the 60-70%. I will tell you figures based on yearly spending in terms of budget, if you don't mind. Today, South African government spends for one level of load shedding approximately 35 billion rands per year for diesel. And Powership solution would be less than 15 billion rands per year. So less than half of what it costs to the government to generate the same electricity with diesel. What we hope to do is to make sure we come in a timely manner so that we can alleviate at least one level of load shedding and do that by reducing the average cost of electricity.
Comparing Karpowership's prices to the exorbitant price of diesel is, of course, not necessarily fair. Using the diesel generators that much is an emergency solution, which hopefully won't go on for too long. But as things stand, South Africans will be saddled with Karpowership's high prices for a full 20 years. Zainab, these ships are massive. How many will be going to South Africa?
They are 300 meters long and 50 meters width. And these ships are called Cape-sized ships, which are one of the largest ships in the world. They are conventionally to carry cargoes from one location to another, but we've converted these Cape-sized ships into floating power plants using their hangars to act as powerhouses where we put our engines inside. In Kuha, we're going to have 2 power ships and an FSRU. In Saldanha, we're going to have 1 power ship. And in Richards Bay, again, we're going to have 2 power ships and an FSRU, all totaling 1.2 gigawatts of power generation, which is more than enough to alleviate one level of load shedding.
So you, as Car Powership, are willing to accept a 5-year deal instead of a 20-year deal. How does that affect costs? Because we were looking at about 360 billion. That could take you right down to about 90 billion as a really rough guesstimate. But would you be prepared to lose that much money?
We are the only company in the world that can bring 1,200 megawatts in a fast-track manner to South Africa. And we are the only company that can actually bring 1,200 megawatts for only 5 years, because our assets are floating. So they are literally plug and play, where from their onboard substation we connect to the local grids. So it is very easy for us to connect and disconnect from an electrical grid. And for that, we are ready to come for 5 years, and we are open for discussions on all commercial and technical matters with the relevant authorities.
Why would you as a company, though, be willing to take such a price drop, though, from 20 years to 5 years?
The commercial structure around it will be discussed directly, whatever works best for South Africa and our company. I mean, the pricing around electricity is, as I said, almost 60-70% fuel. So it would be an all-in cost of electricity comparison versus other solutions. And whatever is the best proposal we can put forward for 5 years, we will. And if that is saving billions of rand to South Africa every year, I think it's an offer to be considered.
There's a complication in that certainly would please a lot of South Africans and put their minds at ease, because the spend would be far less, right?
To be honest, we are more economic than almost all land-based options as well. We're just giving this 5-year option as a ease of decision making. But 5 years of a project is better than 20 years of nothing, if that's the decision that we will be subjected to.
The Minister of Minerals and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, he seems to be pushing for a 20-year deal. The new Minister of Electricity, Minister Ramakgopa, he's pushing for a 5-year deal. So there seems to be a tension there. Has anybody from the South African government come and spoken to you about reducing the time span of the deal?
I've never met with the 2 gentlemen, but the whole procurement process is managed at working level. So the relevant authorities in all ministries are discussing based on tender communication channels. And those are the only allowed communication channels.
But as of yet, correct me if I'm wrong, nobody from South Africa has approached you about reducing that very costly deal from 20 years to 5 years.
You are correct. We have not been approached by South African government or any of its entities to reduce the term to 5 years.
But surely if the 20 years does go to 5 years, there has to be a whole new tender process.
We are also very happy if the South African government wanted to open a new procurement process to reduce the term to 5 years. However, let me just give you one small example. In Ghana, we have 450 megawatts that has been operating since 2016. When we first went to Ghana, they said, we're going to contract you directly with World Bank direct procurement processes in an open book, fixed IRR manner, and we want you to come as fast as possible. Because if we do a tender, Ghana said, the tender preparation is going to take 6 months, and then 3 months for evaluation, 3 months for contracting, 3 months for your delivery. We will lose billions of dollars in due course, whereas you can come immediately and save us that amount. That's what we want to avoid in South Africa. To delay this process more, we want to make sure that we can come fast and alleviate at least one level of load shedding so the South Africans can experience economic growth, economic activity, and the new generation of South Africans can find jobs.
I think all South Africans would agree with you on that. But you won the bid in 2021, and since then the gas price has gone from $2 to, at some stage, $80. There's a massive fluctuation in price there. How will that affect the South African consumer?
You're absolutely right. The gas prices have fluctuated immensely during the Ukrainian and Russian conflict. And what we are experiencing now is they went from $2, $3 to all the way to, as you said, $80 at its peak. And now it's back to $8, $9. And all the futures and forwards seem to stabilize there. If we were to enter into a long-term gas supply agreement, we would consider some sort of price hedging, so the South African government would know exactly how much they're going to pay for the duration of the contract.
The problem is with a 20-year contract is that South Africans would hope, I presume, that with that amount of money, let's just say 300 billion, we would be building our own infrastructure on land to be able to put permanent infrastructure into position to put energy into the grid permanently, whereas you're going to be floating and then you'll just pull up anchor and sail off, leaving nothing behind.
With power ships, we will be in Kuha, Saldanha, and Richards Bay, we will be creating tens of thousands of direct and indirect jobs. And with more electricity, South Africa will be creating millions of more jobs. With that in mind, when you consider the economic and physical lifetime of any power plant, it's already 20 years. That's why they issued the tender for 20 years, because any power plant needs to be decommissioned after 20 years. With a power ship, we don't put any burden on the environment. We're coming with a ready asset, we're only connecting to the local grids, and we're generating the same electricity as the land-based power plant, only cheaper, and leaving much less environmental footprint than a land-based power plant.
So environmentalists may disagree with you, and one of the arguments has been that rather why don't we recommission the power plants that are sitting there and crumbling rather than bringing in a ship that's just going to move away. But that's not an argument for you to have to justify. I'm just wondering, if you do have to go into a new tender process, does that mean we're going to have to wait another how many years for us to get renewables back or into the grid at all?
We are, as a company, we have solar plants all around the world, and we are in full support of renewables. We also have geothermal. But renewables destabilize the grids because of frequency and voltage. And thermal electricity stabilizes the grid. The reason for that is renewables are unpredictable. When there is sun, there is solar. When there is wind power. But with thermal, it is pure dispatchable. So to be able to integrate more renewables in the grid, you need more thermal power. I give the basic example. You can't just make pudding with only eggs. You need a mix of portfolio. So Annika, these are the engines. Each engine has 18 pistons, so 9 pistons on each side. And if you put a propulsion instead of an alternator, it would actually make the ship move. But when you put an alternator, then it creates electrical current.
If the ship were turned on, what would this feel like and what would the sound be like?
There will be a loud noise in this powerhouse, and we would be wearing our ear protectors.
Okay.
But the whole ship is covered with foams that are noise insulators.
Okay.
So there is no sound that leaves the ship. So when the ship is operating, it is actually quite silent outside the ship.
So residents in Saldanha Bay, Kucha, Richards Bay, they're not going to hear the massive noise of generators and engines.
Not at all. They're not going to hear a thing.
What about vibrations? Is there a massive vibration going on underneath the sea, on the seabed?
There are springs under each of these engines which are called vibration absorbers. So the ship itself does not have any outside effects. In fact, in Ghana, in the fishing harbor that we were operating, fish bred along the power ship, and all the fishermen park their ships right alongside the power ship and fish right there. So there is almost no impact on the marine life except for like 1 Celsius degree temperature change, and there is no impact in terms of noise.
If the contract is reduced with a new tender, I presume it's going to have to happen, from 20 years to 5 years, what kind of drop or cut are you going to have to take as a company?
So our fleet consists of multiple assets. And as Car Power Ship, the way we run our business is fleet utilization. So we are very happy if the asset operates in South Africa for 5 years and then goes to Mozambique for another 5 years.
The problem for you, I suppose, is you're sitting in a grey area because you don't actually know, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't know what's happening. So you can't, those massive ships that we saw in the harbour in Istanbul that were sitting there waiting to go to South Africa, what are you going to do with those? Because you don't know, you have got no finality or financial close even on this deal.
South Africa is a very important project for our company, but obviously it's not the only project. So we have many other projects elsewhere, which all of our clients as of date, without an exception, have either increased their capacity or extended their contract term. This means we have full customer satisfaction. We are only looking for the privilege and the opportunity to prove ourselves to the South African government. Once the South African people will understand the benefits of the electricity that is environmental friendly, economic, reliable, delivered fast track to the South African economy, then I believe we will also most likely be asked for a contract extension.
Which means then the South African government again will not build the infrastructure, the permanent infrastructure that we so desperately need in order to create a sustainable future. Renewing your contract is good for you, but it's not necessarily good for South Africans.
The building of a power plant in itself is not a success. Delivering low-cost electricity to the consumers and to the economy is a success. So whoever is able to do that in a fast-track and reliable manner, I believe, should be contributing to the country's energy sector.
The problem is that you may be the fastest and the easiest, but you're not a permanent solution. And we need permanent solutions. But to be fair, that's not for you to justify. You're providing a fast service. It's up to the South African government and the tender process to decide what they want. This leads me to a question that a lot of multinationals have discussed with us. It's not always easy doing business in South Africa. There is a lot of political infighting within the ruling party, and this is difficult to navigate. What's your experience been like?
The tender is run at a working level, so we've never been exposed to any political aspect of the country. We've been exposed to the engineers or the captains at Port Authority or the environmental engineers at the FFE, but we've never experienced any political aspect of South Africa, to be frank.
The way we understand it, you have to have BEE partners, and they were going to get a 49% stake in Car Power Ship. Mm-hmm. Those BEE partners were supposed to raise capital, mm-hmm. but they didn't, and they couldn't because of financial close anyway. But what has happened to those BEE partners, and why were they going to get such a huge share?
The structure in the tender evaluation structure was 90% price and 10% economic development. To get the 10% economic development points in the tender, you had to have an appropriate Black economic empowerment participation. And our participation is, as you said, 49% BEE and 51% Karpowership into the project development joint venture. Today, we have economic BEE partners that have an efficient working relationship, and all other dealings with them is governed by a document called the shareholders agreement. So we do whatever is in accordance with the shareholders agreement, and we expect the BEE partners to do whatever is in accordance with the shareholders agreement. As long as that conditions are met, then it's an efficiently working relationship.
How did you choose the BEE partners, and what did they actually do for such a huge amount of money that was going to come their way?
We met with our current BEE partner, I believe, in 2016, while we were developing projects in Mozambique. By the way, in Mozambique, we have 120 megawatts that have been supplying the country since 2016. So we met him through the Southern Africa power generation network. So that gentleman brought on 2 lawyers and an accountant along with him to form the BEE company, who is now our 49% BEE partners.
Are you happy with those BEE partners and what they've managed to come up with at this stage?
To be perfectly honest, it's not an emotional relationship. It's a business relationship. And like any business relationship, as long as we apply the contract, we are happy. As long as the contract does not work, then if the contract does not work, then we will reach a mutually agreed point where we'll do whatever is best for the project.
What do they actually do to get such a huge amount of money, though? I tell you why I'm asking this.
Of course, please.
During the Zondo Commission, we heard about the architecture of these massive deals, especially from Eskom, which has been seen as a cash cow for the ruling party to loot from. And they're structured in such a way that these BEE partners get huge amounts of money, they're politically connected, and they don't actually do anything for the country or for South Africans as part of the deal. It's money you need to pay them. And it's a corruption red flag.
Oh, in our BEE partnership shareholders agreement, everybody needs to put up their share financially. So whatever is the development costs are, everybody needs to put up their share of the development costs.
Have they done that?
I would be breaching like 2 pages of confidentiality clauses if I answer that, because it's under shareholders agreement.
Did anyone in the political sphere advise you or your team or your main BEE person to appoint certain people? Because there have been allegations that 1 or 2 of them are linked to the Minister of Minerals and Energy, Gwede Mantashe.
When we were introduced, the 2 lawyers and the accountant, our initial BEE partner wanted to bring on, we hired the Big 4 to do a very thorough background check, due diligence, and make sure none of them were politically exposed people or had any dealings whatsoever. And they passed all those tests diligently. That's why we've agreed to work with them. And in all other projects that we do all across Africa, we don't have local partners because we do the lowest cost of power generation in a fast-track manner, and the government utility wants to buy that electricity, almost like a cross-border electricity trade. It is the South African regulations that ask you to have BEE partners, and as I said, as a family, our way of looking at projects is whatever the country regulation governs, you need to satisfy. There's an African proverb, as a guest, you can't untie the goat.
There's another saying, which is, this is the way it's done in South Africa, which means that there is a corruptor and a corruptee. And in order to get the business done, quite frankly, certain people need to get a little piece of the pie.
We are a technology company. We don't care about politics. Our job is to deliver the lowest cost of electricity, deliver it fast track, operate it reliably, leave minimal environmental footprint. This is our modus operandi.
One of your BE partners, Thabo George Mokoena, does have links to politicians. He did consultancy work for 2 state security ministers. So there is political exposure there. Are you concerned about that?
To be honest, out of the BEE partners, George was the person who's a lawyer least involved in the project. I've never even met him in person. I've only seen him 2-3 times, maximum 3 times, over video conference, over Zoom or Teams, and he's not a man of too much words. He didn't even speak that much. So I don't really know George, except for all the due diligence and the background checks reports that we got from the big 4 consultancy banks, that he was okay and clear to be our BEE partner.
So what was he actually doing? What does he actually do?
He's a lawyer who is part of the BEE shareholding company, energy entrepreneur, 2 lawyers, George is one of them, and an accountant who formed that company, who's our BEE partners.
You have to pay those BEE partners 25%.
No. We don't need to pay BEE partners anything. In fact, they need to pay to be part of the joint venture. They need to pay their share of the development costs.
Is there any other country in the world that you've dealt with where you have to have BEE partners or consultants on board in order to clinch a deal?
In Indonesia, it's not necessarily Black economic empowerment partners, but you need some local partnership from a local Indonesian company.
In terms of how the ship will operate and function, how many crew will be on board?
There will be approximately 60 to 80 crew for each ship. And remember, we will be bringing 5 power ships and 3 FSRUs. And
FSRUs are the gas-carrying ships that feed these big ones, right?
Exactly. They convert liquid natural gas into regular natural gas. And most of the crews will be South African.
How do you find crews that are South Africans who are equipped to know how to work a ship like this?
That's actually a good question, because in this ship, there are 2 different type of personnel. Some of them are seamen, which is like the captain, the assistant captain, and some are regular power plant operators. So those are the operation and maintenance team. They don't need to have any sea experience. They will just be conventional engineers.
Opposing bidders and energy consultants have said that that entire emergency procurement deal was massaged and you were given exceptions so that this deal would go through.
That is absolutely incorrect, but there were so many things in the tender and we were like, oh, this is going to even handicap us, like for example, the engines that we use are very efficient at partial loads. At half load, they're as efficient as they're at full load. But all other technologies, such as turbines, reduce their efficiency by multiples if they're operated at half load. For example, the tender evaluation was comparing everyone at full load, which honestly handicapped us. But that was the comparison matrix that they choose.
Even if this tender goes through now, this deal goes through, will you make it by May next year, which is when we have our elections?
If this deal went through, it would take from Turkey to South Africa 26 days for the voyage of those 1,200 megawatt ships. which consists 5 power ships. And those 5 power ships would sail 26 days and they would be in South Africa. And you saw those vessels yourself that are ready to operate in Istanbul. So we would just be taking them in less than 1 month. And then it would take us 2 months thereafter to complete the necessary site works, which is completing the electrical connection, stringing transmission towers with the right conductors, erecting transmission towers, doing the dredging so that we can park the ship. That would take 2 months.
But that's only if you get the exception to use your own service providers.
That is correct.
Which you don't have.
That is correct. So in total, it would take us 3 months to put 1,200 megawatt in the grid, with the disclaimer, you're absolutely right, if we were allowed to use any subcontractor in South Africa.
Would they be Turkish or would they be South
No,
African?
they would be South African.
If you can't use your own, if you don't get that exception and you're not allowed to use your own subcontractors, how long would it take?
Then it would take still 9 months to 1 year. So if we're allowed to use any subcontractor in South Africa, it would take us 3 months to put 1,200 megawatt on the grid. If we are allowed to use only the tender approved list of subcontractors, then it would take us 9 to 12 months.
There have also been allegations of bribery committed by you in Lebanon. 25 million to settle the matter is apparently what Car Powership paid. Is that something that you can talk about?
Can I correct
Please
the information, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course.
What we have signed is an indemnification letter saying if there were any corrupt practices ever in this deal, we would be happy to pay $25 million in addition to any other damages that any court would be put us subject to. And we wanted to sign this indemnification letter ourselves because there were zero wrongdoing.
During our interview with the outgoing Eskom CEO, Andre de Ruyter, he said that Eskom wasn't happy signing the deal with Car Powership because your lawyers were vehemently against signing enhanced corruption clauses.
On the contrary, we have our wording of an indemnification letter on Eskom's desk right now, which is waiting for feedback and edits from the Eskom side. We are very happy to sign an indemnification letter with Eskom.
DNG, the losing bidder, took the matter to court and said that they'd been approached by third parties to pay bribes, that this is how things are done in South Africa. There was a special meeting at a restaurant called Cream where these so-called shady talks took place. They lost the case. But did this raise any warning signs for you that maybe you would be asked to participate in the same kind of shadowy deals in order to secure the tender?
No, not at all. To be honest, what the NG case represents is a very good reflection of what a sore loser is. What the NG did was to sue all 11 awarded projects. Every single awarded project, the NG sued. The NG sued Eskom, IPP office, and all the authorities that were involved in the tender process. And they did that after the tender results were out. Now, it begs you to ask the question, why do you wait until the tender results are out? If you're suspicious of anything, why not do it before? And in the court, of course, we won, but it delayed South Africa getting electricity by 1 year, minimum 1 year. What DNG alone cost the South African economy is in hundreds of billions of rands in that 1 year for not allowing any project to progress because everybody was in freeze, pause mode until all the legal disputes were resolved.
safety-wise? What are the chances of one of these ships having a massive fire or an explosion?
Since the start of our operations, which has been 13 years, where we've operated 30 power ships globally in 14 different countries, we've only had one and only small incident where no lives were hurt.
Is that in Indonesia?
Yes, that's in Indonesia. There was a small leakage in one of the boilers, which was a third-party issue, but no lives were harmed, not even a strand of hair of any of our employees.
How did you manage that? Because it was visually quite a big explosion. I mean, there was like a lot of flames.
It was on the outside part of the ship, and there is no people operating that part. So it was just a small leakage, but because of the combustion effect, it looks much bigger than it actually is.
Just in terms of the current status quo, we know that the Minister of Electricity wants a 5-year deal. We know that the Minister of Minerals and Energy is happy with a 20-year deal. Where do we currently stand? We as the South African public, we don't know.
Annika, as I said, it will be the first time we say it to the South African authorities and the public. As Car Power Ship, we are ready to come for a 5-year deal.
But you haven't spoken to anybody in South Africa about that?
In South Africa, our communication with the authorities are only through official, formal communication channels with the working team.
But you've met with Pravin Gordhan, you said earlier, who's the Minister of Public Enterprises.
We have requested a meeting with Minister Gordhan a month ago, saying we have many open issues with Eskom, TMPA, and IPP office and every other authorities, and asked if he can invite his team together for us to go over all open issues all together. And
has that been done?
Yes, that's been done maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and they were very good in having an open discussion. We've looked at all 3 sides. We went over all open items with TMPA, with Eskom, and it was a working group session. They had their leader present so that if they hit any bottlenecks internally, they could consult. And that was the first and only interaction we had with Minister Gordhan, who's a lovely gentleman.
In terms of the 5 to 20-year deal, did that come up at all?
No. In fact, we asked him, do you know if we will be able to discuss commercial items? He said very openly, it's not my department. My department is only Eskom issues and TMPA issues. You need to discuss that with the MRE.
Just in terms of the current status quo of the deal as it stands now, what is outstanding?
That's a very good question. Today, the only thing between today and the financial close is the environmental permits. All other permits are finished, and for the environmental permits, we are at the stage of completing our second round of public participation, which then we will submit to the FFE, and they will have 57 days for their internal evaluation. And for Eskom, Eskom has our indemnification letter on in their hand. If they want to change anything on it, they need to write their edits and send it back to us for our legal counsels to evaluate.
What does the indemnity include?
I don't know, Annika.
Are you happy with some of the offsets that have been directed towards you as part of getting the tender?
By offsets, do you mean the environmental offset?
Yeah.
It's not my place to be happy or unhappy about it. We're just following the rule book. We're just following the legal guidelines. So I think I know what you're talking about. The offset for the Richards Bay black herring bird livelihood, then we need to buy and donate a game reserve to the FFE or the gaming Can I take that back? Because I'm not super informed about it.
So you don't know whether you were directed to buy a game reserve from a certain person or anything like that?
No, we did whatever the FFE requirement was.
Chief Commercial Officer of Car Power Ship, Zeynep Parisi, we thank you so much for your time. We in South Africa as taxpayers are desperate for clean, sustainable power that will go back into the grid and will be done without corruption. We're a traumatized nation that has come through so much looting and state capture. So I hope you understand that that's where our questioning is coming from. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time
Thank you.
on My Guest Tonight.